Hey there, everyone. How's it going? Welcome to another video on the Facts and Legends channel. Today, we're diving into some of the strangest facts from medieval times. During this period, people had some truly bizarre habits and beliefs. Animal trials. Believe it or not, animals could be treated as criminals. They were even taken to court, complete with lawyers, judges, and all the formalities. These creatures could be imprisoned and in some cases even executed. In one peculiar case from the Swiss city of Lausanne, a court summoned a group of larvae accused of destroying garden plants. When the larvae failed to appear, they were excommunicated and banished from the town. Cats, however, suffered a particularly grim fate. They were among the most executed animals, as people believed they were linked to the devil. This widespread extermination of felines led to a surge in the rodent population, which in turn played a significant role in spreading the plague across Europe. Now that was a real crime. Spontaneous generation. People once believed that mold, worms, and insects simply appeared out of garbage or were created by the forces of evil. Given the limited development of biology at the time, it's not surprising that such an explanation was widely accepted. But it's downright strange to think that, centuries ago, people also believed rats could just materialize on their own. Disease treatments. In the Middle Ages, treatments for illnesses like the Black Death were rooted in superstition and natural remedies, often absurd and completely ineffective. For example, people believed sitting in sewage would drive the disease away with its stench. Others resorted to wandering the streets, whipping themselves as a form of penance. Some towns even slaughtered all the cats and dogs, thinking it would stop the spread. And if that wasn't enough, some turned to eating arsenic powder, which, unsurprisingly, killed them just as quickly as the disease itself. To top it off, hot oil was often poured on wounds and used during surgeries to aid healing. Unsurprisingly, most of these methods only worsened the patient's conditions or killed them outright. Babies don't feel pain. The idea that infants, especially newborns, don't feel pain seems absurd by today's standards, but it wasn't just a medieval belief. It persisted well into the 1970s. For centuries, people thought that a baby's brain wasn't developed enough to process pain like an adult's. This misguided notion heavily influenced medical practices for young children. Babies were often subjected to invasive surgeries without any anesthesia, under the assumption that their cries or movements were merely reflexes, devoid of any real pain sensation. The psychological and physical consequences of this practice were largely ignored, as infants couldn't verbalize their suffering. It wasn't until the 1980s, with advancements in neuroscience and studies on nervous system development, that it was scientifically proven newborns have fully functional neural pathways capable of transmitting and processing pain. The salvation of peasants. In the Middle Ages, the ultimate dream was eternal salvation, a guaranteed spot in paradise after death. From the mightiest kings and nobles to the humblest peasants, everyone longed for divine grace to secure their place by God's side. Yet popular imagination often intertwined with religious beliefs, giving rise to stories as bizarre as they were reflective of the era's social inequalities. One of the most peculiar rumors concerned the souls of peasants. According to some tales, these souls couldn't complete their journey to the afterlife. Why? Even demons, the carriers of sinners, refused to handle peasants due to the unbearable stench clinging to their bodies after a lifetime of hard labor and unsanitary conditions. This wasn't just a crude joke, but a grim reflection of the social divide and the disdain for rural workers. In popular belief, odor and filth were tied to moral and spiritual impurity, and the peasants' lack of hygiene became an excuse to demean them, even in religious contexts. While nobles could afford masses and indulgences to secure their salvation, peasants bore the double burden of earthly misery and a supposed posthumous condemnation, where even demons seemed to turn their backs on them. Bees were birds. The medieval bestiary, a sort of encyclopedia on animals, still fascinates us today. Bees, for instance, were thought to be tiny, exotic birds. Not only did they produce honey, but they also engaged in fierce battles with rival hives, a phenomenon that puzzled scholars of the time. One of the most intriguing beliefs was the idea that bees possessed a deep sense of morality. If a bee broke the hive's rules, it was said to feel such guilt that it would sting itself, leading to its death. For medieval thinkers, this behavior symbolized discipline and loyalty to their community, casting bees as exemplary creatures. Castor as a fish. Speaking of animals, did you know that beavers were considered fish? This classification allowed their meat to be eaten during Lent, a time when consuming terrestrial animals was forbidden. Moreover, certain parts of the beaver's body were widely believed to have medicinal properties, making the animal a frequent target for hunters. These beliefs showcase how medieval views of nature often blended imagination with practical needs. Infertility in ancient times. In ancient times, infertility was viewed solely as a women's issue. Back then, bearing children was seen as a woman's primary role, and those who couldn't conceive were often subjected to religious rituals. Practices like fervent prayers and pilgrimages to sacred sites were common, in the hope of divine intervention to grant them the ability to bear children. During the medieval period, curious methods emerged to investigate infertility in both women and men. One such technique involved collecting urine from each party and mixing it with bran in separate containers. These were then left to sit for 9 or 10 days. If worms appeared in only one container, it was believed the owner of that sample was responsible for the inability to conceive. The cross on Brussels sprouts. Even today, in many Western countries, it's common to see people cutting a cross into Brussels sprouts before cooking them. While some believe this helps them cook faster, the practice actually stems from ancient superstitions. In medieval Britain, it was thought that tiny demons or malevolent spirits could hide among the tightly packed leaves of Brussels sprouts. If someone accidentally consumed one of these beings, they would suffer severe indigestion, a notion that amusingly parallels the effects of eating contaminated food. At the time, thoroughly washing vegetables wasn't a widespread practice. Instead, people relied on religious symbolism to purify their food. Cutting a cross into Brussels sprouts was seen as a form of baptism, driving out any lurking evil forces. What began as a blend of faith and fear eventually evolved into a culinary habit, with its original meaning largely forgotten over time.